Dr. Harper, ICU Room 3. The words echoed through the sterile hospital corridor as I clutched my clipboard, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across my scrubs. For a split second, the world stopped, because 10 years ago, my parents told everyone the same lie over and over. She's not a doctor. She dropped out. But here I was, and the patient in ICU Room 3 was my brother Michael. Let me take you back to where it all started. A dinner table that looked perfect from the outside, but felt like a battlefield every single night. The Harper family dining room was pristine. Mom had this obsession with appearances. The china had to match, the napkins folded just right, and every conversation carefully orchestrated to maintain our image as the successful American family. Dad would sit at the head of the table in his pressed shirt, still smelling like his law office, while Mom served her famous pot roast with that practiced smile she'd perfected over 20 years of marriage. And there was Michael. Golden boy Michael with his perfect GPA, his pre-med track at Northwestern, and his ability to make our parents beam with pride just by existing. At 22, he was everything they'd ever dreamed of. Handsome, charismatic, and destined for greatness in their eyes. Then there was me, Rebecca, the disappointment. Michael, tell us about your organic chemistry exam. Mom would coo, passing him the best cuts of meat while barely acknowledging my presence. I'm so proud of how dedicated you are to your studies. Michael would launch into detailed explanations of molecular structures while I sat there, picking at my food, watching my parents hang on his every word like he was delivering the cure for cancer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one secretly devouring medical journals in my bedroom, but they'd already written me off as the family failure. What about you, Rebecca? Dad would ask occasionally, more out of obligation than genuine interest. How's the community college going? The way he said community college made it sound like a disease. I'd dropped out of my 4-year university after one semester, not because I couldn't handle the work, but because I couldn't handle watching my parents spend their entire savings on Michael's education while expecting me to figure it out on my own. They'd made it clear where their priorities lay. It's fine, Dad, I'd mumble, knowing that anything I said would be dismissed or compared unfavorably to whatever Michael had accomplished that week. But here's what they didn't know. Every night after those painful dinners, I'd retreat to my room and study. Real studying. I'd check out advanced biology textbooks from the library, watch surgical procedures online, and dream of the day I could prove them wrong. The medical journals I kept hidden under my mattress were more precious to me than any family heirloom. The first real crack in our family's perfect facade happened during my 19th birthday dinner. I'd been working 2 jobs, one at a local diner and another cleaning offices at night, trying to save enough money to re-enroll in school. I was exhausted but determined, and I'd finally gathered the courage to tell my parents about my plan to apply to medical school. Medical school? Mom nearly choked on her wine. Rebecca, honey, be realistic. You couldn't even finish 1 semester of regular college. That's different, Mom. I know what I want now. I've been studying. Studying what? Dad interrupted with that condescending tone that made my stomach clench. You're a waitress, Rebecca. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't pretend it's something it's not. Michael, ever the diplomat, tried to soften the blow. Maybe she could be a nurse or something. That's still in healthcare, right? Their casual dismissal of my dreams hit harder than any scream or argument could have. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was indifferent. They literally couldn't imagine me succeeding at anything meaningful, and they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. That night marked the beginning of what I now understand was systematic emotional destruction. They didn't set out to crush my spirit. They just genuinely believed I was incapable of greatness, and they treated me accordingly. Every family gathering became an exercise in highlighting my failures and Michael's successes. Extended family members would ask about the kids, and my parents would launch into glowing descriptions of Michael's achievements before reluctantly mentioning that I was still figuring things out. The gaslighting was subtle but relentless. When I'd try to contribute to conversations about current events or share something I'd learned, Dad would get this patient expression that said, That's nice, dear, but the adults are talking. When I'd mention my work schedule or how tired I was, Mom would remind me that I'd chosen this path by dropping out of school. They weren't being deliberately cruel. They'd genuinely convinced themselves that their low expectations were realistic assessments of my abilities. In their minds, they were protecting me from disappointment by steering me away from goals they deemed impossible. But the comparison trap was where they really excelled. Michael got another A on his biochemistry exam. You know, Rebecca, when he was your age, he was already thinking about his specialty. Or, Michael's professor wants him to help with research this summer. Isn't that wonderful? What are your plans, Rebecca? My plans were to work double shifts so I could afford MCAT prep books, but sharing that would only invite more skepticism and comparisons to Michael's funded path to success. The isolation was gradual, but thorough. Friends from high school would ask my parents how I was doing, and they'd respond with embarrassed shrugs and quick subject changes. "Rebecca's still finding herself," became their standard response, delivered with just enough pity to make it clear that they'd given up hope. They stopped including me in conversations about the future, holiday planning, family investments, even casual discussions about where we'd all be in 5 years. I became invisible in these moments. It was like they'd already written the story of our family's success, and I simply wasn't a character worth developing. The financial control was perhaps the most insidious part. They'd paid for Michael's entire education without question, but when I asked for help with even basic expenses, suddenly money was tight. "If you'd stayed in school like Michael, we could help, but we can't keep throwing money at poor decisions." Meanwhile, they'd renovated their kitchen twice and bought Dad a new BMW, but helping their daughter pursue her actual dreams was somehow irresponsible spending. What they didn't understand was that every dismissal, every comparison, every casual write-off was fuel for a fire they couldn't see burning inside me. I wasn't just studying to prove them wrong. I was studying to save myself from becoming the failure they'd already decided I was. The breaking point came during Christmas of my 21st year. The whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all gathered around our pristine dining room table. Michael was home from Northwestern, glowing with the confidence that comes from never having your worth questioned. "Tell everyone about your MCAT score, Michael," Mom prompted, practically vibrating with pride. Michael, to his credit, tried to deflect. "It's just a test, Mom." "Just a test?" Dad laughed. "It's the test that's going to get you into Johns Hopkins." The room erupted in congratulations and excited chatter about Michael's bright future in medicine. I sat there, literally invisible, while my family celebrated the exact dream I'd been nursing in secret for 3 years. Uncle Jim, trying to be inclusive, turned to me. "And what about you, Rebecca? What are you up to these days?" The table went quiet. I could feel my parents' anxiety like a physical weight, their fear that I might embarrass them in front of the extended family. Mom jumped in before I could answer. "Rebecca's still exploring her options. She's working very hard." It was a kind way of saying nothing, and everyone understood the subtext. I was the family disappointment, the cautionary tale, the child they loved but had stopped believing in. But something snapped in me that night. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was 3 years of swallowed dreams finally demanding to be heard. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence, "I'm planning to take the MCAT next spring." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the panic in my parents' eyes, the embarrassment that their delusional daughter was making claims she couldn't back up in front of the whole family. "Rebecca," Dad said carefully, "we've talked about this. Maybe it's better to focus on realistic goals." "Like what?" I asked, my voice stronger now. "Working at the diner forever? Never trying for anything better because you've decided I can't handle it?" "That's not what we're saying," Mom interjected, but her tone said otherwise. "Then what are you saying? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've given up on me completely." The family dinner disintegrated into awkward conversations and early departures. Later that night, after everyone had left, my parents confronted me in the kitchen. "You embarrassed us tonight," Mom said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "How? By having ambitions?" "By having unrealistic expectations," Dad corrected. Rebecca, we love you, but we also know your limitations. You're setting yourself up for failure, and it's painful to watch. What if I'm not failing? What if I'm actually good at this? They exchanged that look, the one that said they were dealing with a child who couldn't understand adult realities. Honey, Mom said gently, you couldn't even handle freshman year at State. Medical school is infinitely harder. I'm not the same person I was at 18. You're right, Dad agreed. You're older, and it's time to be practical. There's no shame in having a simple life. A simple life. That's what they saw when they looked at me. Someone destined for simplicity because complexity was beyond my capabilities. They weren't being cruel. They genuinely believed they were protecting me from dreams too big for my supposed abilities. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom surrounded by hidden medical textbooks and MCAT prep materials, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to just take the MCAT. I was going to ace it. And I wasn't going to just apply to medical school. I was going to get accepted to the best programs in the country. But more than that, I decided that if they couldn't see my potential, I'd have to prove it without their support. I'd been trying to earn their belief for 3 years, but belief can't be earned from people who've already decided you're not worth the investment. The toxic dynamic in our house shifted after that Christmas dinner. My parents stopped asking about my plans altogether, treating my medical school aspirations like an embarrassing phase I'd eventually outgrow. They'd mention Michael's achievements with increasing frequency, as if his success could somehow balance out my perceived failures. Michael's professor thinks he has real potential for research, Mom would announce over breakfast, looking pointedly at me. It's so wonderful when young people find their calling. The implied message was clear. Some people have callings and others have delusions. They began excluding me from family discussions about the future entirely. When relatives would ask about both kids, they'd spend 20 minutes detailing Michael's accomplishments before briefly mentioning that I was still working at the diner. They'd started introducing me to their friends as our younger daughter instead of by name, as if my identity had been reduced to a familial footnote. The gaslighting intensified. When I'd mention studying for the MCAT, they'd respond with concerned expressions and gentle suggestions that I explore other interests. When I'd try to discuss medical topics at dinner, they'd humor me with the same patience they might show a child playing doctor with stuffed animals. "That's interesting, sweetheart," Dad would say, in response to something I'd learned about cardiac procedures, his tone making it clear that he didn't actually find it interesting at all. They'd started having private conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, and I'd catch them exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I realized they'd begun discussing me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be supported. The isolation became complete when they stopped defending me to extended family. At my cousin's graduation party, I overheard Aunt Linda asking Mom how I was doing, and Mom's response was a resigned sigh and a quiet, "We're just hoping she finds something she can stick with." They'd given up on me publicly now, and the shame of that betrayal cut deeper than any direct criticism ever could. I wasn't just failing in their eyes, I was an embarrassment they had to apologize for to people who'd known me since birth. But with each dismissal, each comparison to Michael, each gentle steering away from my dreams, something was crystallizing inside me. The hurt was transforming into something harder, more determined. If they couldn't see my potential, I'd have to become undeniable. If they couldn't believe in my dreams, I'd have to make those dreams so real that belief became irrelevant. The woman they saw, the college dropout, the waitress, the family disappointment, was about to disappear forever. In her place would emerge someone they never could have imagined, someone whose success would force them to reckon with just how wrong they'd been. But first, I had to survive the complete destruction of everything I'd thought I knew about love, family, and my place in the world. Because what happened next would shatter not just my relationship with my parents, but my entire understanding of who I was and what I was capable of becoming. The worst was yet to come, but so was the best. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're actually made of. The rejection letter came on a Tuesday morning in March. My third medical school rejection in 2 weeks, and suddenly the voices in my head sounded exactly like my parents. You're not smart enough. You're setting yourself up for failure. Be realistic. I sat on the edge of my bed in my tiny studio apartment, surrounded by MCAT prep books and crumpled rejection letters, wondering if maybe they'd been right all along. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe 3 years of secret studying and working double shifts to afford application fees had been nothing more than an elaborate form of self-torture. The apartment was a far cry from my childhood bedroom. After that Christmas dinner confrontation, things at home had become unbearable. Every conversation felt like walking through a minefield, and my parents had started treating me like a ticking time bomb, someone whose delusions needed to be carefully managed to prevent further embarrassment. So I'd moved out with nothing but my savings from the diner and a determination that was rapidly crumbling under the weight of reality. That Tuesday morning, staring at Northwestern Medical School's polite but firm rejection, I called in sick to work and didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. I ordered pizza, ignored my phone, and seriously considered calling my parents to tell them they'd been right. Maybe I could go back to community college. Maybe being a nurse wasn't such a terrible compromise. Maybe I could stop fighting for dreams that seemed determined to stay just out of reach. But on the 3rd day, something happened that changed everything. I was lying on my couch in yesterday's clothes, half watching some mindless TV show when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Is this Rebecca Harper? Yes. This is Dr. Martinez from Cook Medical School's admissions office. I'm calling to let you know that you've been accepted into our program with a partial scholarship. I sat up so fast I nearly fell off the couch. I'm sorry, what? Congratulations, Rebecca. Your MCAT scores were exceptional, and your personal statement about overcoming adversity really resonated with our admissions committee. We'd love to have you start in the fall. After I hung up, I sat in my messy apartment and cried. Not the broken, hopeless tears I'd been shedding for days, but something different. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or just the overwhelming realization that I wasn't crazy. I actually was capable of more than my family had ever imagined. But instead of calling my parents with the news, I made a different decision. I wasn't ready to share this victory with people who'd spent years convincing me it was impossible. This was mine, and I was going to protect it. Medical school was simultaneously the hardest and most liberating experience of my life. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who understood obsession with learning, who stayed up until 3 a.m. discussing surgical techniques, who found cardiac rhythms as fascinating as I did. But it was also lonely in ways I hadn't anticipated. While my classmates shared updates with proud families and got care packages from home, I was navigating this journey completely alone. My parents didn't even know I was in medical school. As far as they knew, I was still working at the diner and figuring things out. The isolation ate at me sometimes. During family weekend, I'd watch my classmates introduce their parents to professors while I made excuses about my family being too busy to attend. When we got our white coats in the ceremony that marks the transition from student to future doctor, I sat in the audience knowing that the 2 people who should have been proudest weren't there because they didn't even know this day existed. But the loneliness also forged something unbreakable inside me. Every late night studying, every exam I aced, every clinical rotation where I excelled, these victories belonged entirely to me. No one could take credit for my success or claim they'd always believed in me. This was proof of what I could accomplish when the noise of other people's limitations was finally silenced. By my 3rd year, something had fundamentally shifted. The girl who'd sat at that Christmas dinner table, begging for her family's belief, was gone. In her place was a woman who no longer needed anyone else's permission to be great. I excelled in my clinical rotations, particularly in emergency medicine and surgery. Attendings started requesting me for difficult cases, and my evaluations consistently ranked in the top 5% of my class. I wasn't just keeping up, I was thriving in ways that surprised even me. The transformation wasn't just professional. The constant self-doubt that had plagued me for years was evaporating, replaced by quiet confidence born from concrete evidence of my abilities. When I walked into a room now, people listened when I spoke. When I presented cases, even senior physicians nodded in approval. I was becoming someone I'd barely dared to imagine. But success in medical school also meant making difficult choices about my future. Residency applications were due, and I had to decide not just what specialty to pursue, but where I wanted to build my life. Part of me wanted to stay far away from home, to start fresh in a city where my past couldn't reach me. Instead, I did something that would have shocked the broken girl crying over rejection letters. I applied for competitive residencies at the top hospitals in my home state, including the prestigious program at Metropolitan Hospital, the same hospital where my brother Michael had done his summer internships. The decision wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about reclaiming my place in the world I'd grown up in, but on my own terms. I was no longer running from my family's expectations. I was so far beyond them that their opinions had become irrelevant. Match day arrived with the same nervous excitement that affects every fourth-year medical student. The envelope in my hands contained not just my future, but validation of 4 years of relentless work and sacrifice. Metropolitan Hospital Emergency Medicine Residency. I'd matched at the most competitive program in the state, the same hospital where my parents had taken me for broken bones as a child, where they'd rushed Michael when he'd had appendicitis in high school. I was going home, but as someone completely transformed. The next few months blurred together in a whirlwind of graduation, board exams, and preparation for residency. I graduated summa cum laude with distinction in research, earned special recognition for clinical excellence, and gave the student speaker address at commencement to an audience that didn't include my family because they still didn't know I'd spent 4 years earning the degree they'd deemed impossible. Starting residency at Metropolitan was like stepping into an alternate universe. The hospital I remembered from childhood visits, intimidating, sterile, filled with important people doing important work, was now my workplace. The doctors who had once seemed godlike were now my colleagues and mentors. Dr. Sarah Chen, the residency director, pulled me aside during my first week. "Rebecca, I have to say, your application stood out not just for your academic achievements, but for your maturity. There's something different about students who've had to fight for their education. They tend to appreciate it more, work harder, and connect better with patients who are also struggling." She was right. My background, the years of being dismissed, the financial struggles, the isolation, had given me something my more privileged classmates lacked. I could look at a patient who felt hopeless and offer genuine understanding, not just clinical sympathy. My first year of residency was brutal in the way that all medical training is brutal, but I thrived under the pressure. I was used to working multiple jobs and studying on no sleep. I was used to being the only one who believed in what I was doing. The difference now was that my hard work was recognized and rewarded instead of dismissed. By my second year, I was being selected for leadership roles and advanced training opportunities. The attendings who had initially seen me as just another resident began taking special notice of my work. "Harper, you've got good instincts," Dr. Rodriguez told me after I'd successfully managed a complex trauma case. "Have you thought about staying on as chief resident after you finish?" Chief resident. The position went to the best resident in the program, the one chosen to help train the next generation while completing their own education. It was an honor that would set me up for whatever came next in my career. But more than that, it was validation of something I'd known since I was 19 years old, sitting at that painful Christmas dinner. I belonged in medicine, not as someone's compromise or consolation prize, but as someone who had earned their place through talent, dedication, and relentless work. The call came on a Thursday evening in October. I was in the middle of suturing a patient in the ED when my phone buzzed with an unknown local number. Usually, I'd ignore it, but something made me step out of the room to answer. "Is this Dr. Rebecca Harper?" "Yes, this is Dr. Harper." "This is Nurse Johnson from Metropolitan Hospital ICU. We have a patient here, Michael Harper, listed as your brother. He was brought in from a car accident earlier today. He's stable but critical, and he's been asking for family." The world tilted. Michael! My brother, the golden child, the one who was supposed to have the perfect life and perfect career, was lying in an ICU bed asking for family. What's his condition?" I asked, automatically switching into physician mode even as my personal world was spinning. Multiple trauma from a head-on collision, Dr. Peterson is the attending, but given that you're family and also on staff, I thought you should know immediately. Family. The word felt foreign after 5 years of deliberate separation. 5 years of building a life they knew nothing about. I'll be right there, I heard myself saying. The elevator ride to the ICU felt like the longest journey of my life. In the space of those few floors, I was transformed from Dr. Rebecca Harper, chief resident, to Rebecca, the daughter who'd disappeared, the sister who'd been written off, the family member who'd chosen exile over acceptance of their limitations. But I was also someone they'd never met, the woman who'd proven them wrong so completely that their original assessment seemed like a cruel joke. When I walked into the ICU, I saw my parents before they saw me. They were huddled together in the waiting area, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. My mother's hair had gone gray, and my father's confident posture had been replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man facing something he couldn't control or fix. They looked up when they heard the click of my heels on the hospital floor, and I watched their faces cycle through confusion, recognition, and shock. Rebecca? My mother's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, Dad? I nodded professionally, the same way I'd greet any family member of a patient. What are you doing here? How did you know about Michael? I work here, I said simply. I'm Dr. Harper now. I'm the chief resident in emergency medicine. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the vending machine down the hall. My parents stared at me like I was a ghost, or maybe a stranger wearing their daughter's face. You're a doctor, my father said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. I'm a doctor, I confirmed. I finished medical school 2 years ago, and I've been doing my residency here. I'm actually one of the physicians who consulted on Michael's case when he came in. My mother's face crumpled, not with joy or pride, but with something that looked like grief. We didn't know. You never told us. You never asked, I replied, not unkindly, but with the simple honesty of someone who'd moved far beyond the need for their approval. But you were working at the diner. You dropped out of school. I worked at the diner to pay for medical school applications. I took the MCAT while you thought I was serving pancakes. I spent 4 years earning the degree you said I wasn't capable of getting. The weight of what I was saying settled over them like a physical presence. Their daughter, the failure, the disappointment, the one they'd given up on, was standing in front of them wearing scrubs with an ID badge that read, Dr. Rebecca Harper, Chief Resident. Why didn't you tell us? My mother whispered. It was a fair question, and one I'd been preparing to answer for 5 years. Because I needed to do this without your doubt. I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed without having to fight against your certainty that I would fail. And honestly, after years of being told I wasn't smart enough, wasn't dedicated enough, wasn't enough, I stopped needing your permission to be great. My father looked like he'd been physically struck. Rebecca, we never meant to. You meant exactly what you said. You thought you were protecting me from disappointment by steering me away from goals you deemed impossible. But what you were actually protecting was your own discomfort with the possibility that you were wrong. A nurse approached us then, interrupting the moment. Dr. Harper, Dr. Peterson asked if you could consult on the Harper case. There are some complications with the internal injuries. I looked at my parents, these people who'd shaped me, doubted me, and ultimately freed me to become someone they never could have imagined. That's my brother in there, I said to the nurse. And these are my parents. But yes, I'll consult on the case. As I walked toward Michael's room to save my brother's life, using skills my parents had once insisted I didn't possess, I realized that the scared girl who'd left this hospital as a patient years ago was finally returning as the doctor she'd always known she could become. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning.